He may not have your beauty, but he certainly has your brains. Here's your look at the Trick or Treat Studios' The Return of the Living Dead 1/6 scale Tarman figure. Trick or Treat Studios and Living Dead Media are proud to present the official Return of the Living Dead Tarman 1/6 scale action figure. This amazing figure was sculpted from the ground up by Alex Ray and Justin Mabry to give the most movie-accurate look possible. The figure features different materials and finishes to really capture that perfect, gooey, fresh-from-the-barrel zombie look. I guess if Barrel of Monkeys have gotten too boring for you, you can move on over to Barrel of Zombies. You don't have to worry about linking arms together to make a long chain. Instead, the only thing you have to worry about is not chains, but brains. More so your brains. Before we get a closer look, though, at the Return of the Living Dead Tarman, let me go first and thank the folks over at Trick or Treat Studios that did provide this sample that we could have a look in this review. This guy is currently available over on their website for $159.99. Yeah, you heard right, $159.99 for this guy. If you guys are interested, you can certainly click the link down below in the video description. In the meantime, let's go ahead and just grab the tape measure just to see how tall this guy stands. Right to the very top of the head I go. The figure of the Tarman stands not quite 12. 12's up here. The figure is actually more close to being about 11.5 inches in height, or the figure's 29 centimeters tall. Not that they're actually from the same movie verse, but since we've just recently had a look at him, I'm going to move over to Tarman. I'm going to bring in the Halloween 6 Michael Myers. What a strange comparison this is, just only because these figures now have just recently launched by Trick or Treat Studios, and I just happen to have reviewed both of them. Michael Myers just recently had a look at them, so I did want to show you guys the difference in sizes. I suppose for all intents and purposes, you could look at the Tarman and assume he's a normal-sized human. He's not oversized in this case. He's about the same size, give or take, as Michael Myers. Granted, Michael Myers has a lot more hair. You don't really get too much when it comes to Tarman. He comes with the juicy brain, and of course he comes with a swapped out head sculpt that we're going to talk more about in a moment. First, though, go back and talk about the succulent brains that he comes included with. The brains themselves, as you can see, look quite wet. It also looks as if he's been mowing down on the side of it. It looks like there's some bite marks there on the side of the brain. The brain has, of course, now been removed from its original host, and he can hold it, but he doesn't hold it very well. The hands themselves aren't swapped out, for example, for any other option, so you sort of have to just do a balancing act of having him hold the brains. I find like this hand is the better of the two. I guess for all intents and purposes, you could have him in this hand, but let's just say if you want to put him in this hand, I actually like this one because you can take the end stem of the brain and have it kind of sticking in between his fingers. This does throw off a little bit of a balancing issue when it comes to Tarman. His ankles, the way they've sculpted the ankles, sort of result in the figure having a little bit of stability issues that we're going to talk more about in a moment. But yeah, you do have the means to actually have him holding the brains. Rightfully so, rightfully so. If he's one that wants the brains and acquires the brains, you'd like to think at least he could hold the brains. Succulent brains aside, though, let's actually just pick that up and put this over to the side here. One thing I found was really clever with Trick or Treat Studios is that they gave him two different head sculpts specific to certain scenes. Mostly when you see the Tarman actually moving around, he's actually a person that's dressed up in suit. When he is dressed up in a suit, he has a very more noticeably larger head. However, though, he does come included with a close-up version of the head sculpt, which is very much smaller in size. This is what they would consider the brains head option, which is essentially when the Tarman first calls for Tina's brains. In that shot, in fact, that they're actually closer in on the shot, they end up using a puppet, an animatronic puppet, but it ends up being smaller than the head sculpt that would have been on the actual actor playing the role. We're going to go pick up the two, and so just move his arms out of the way here for a second, just to show you the difference in the size. You can definitely see, though, how one would have a harder time to fit around the head of an actual actor, this one being right here. This one here, again, being the larger of the two, is the one that would have been in the costume version of Tarman. So again, there's that option available if you want the smaller head sculpt for the close-up brains, or this one is also called the more brains, as he's walking around, limbering around, looking for more brains. To swap out the head sculpts, actually, just before we actually do that, just put the figure down here for 1 second. I want to fast track through actually skipping through the details because the head sculpt on both of these heads are fantastic. I love the coloring that they've used there. First of all, you've got the more darker brown here to the top. It transitions to a very dark black tar, as you can see. And when you open up the mouth, he does have the very bright tongue on the inside. Top and bottom teeth are colored nicely in sort of a more off yellow color. He's got very large googly eyes. Not that they would be Googling much, but he certainly has very large eyes. Very cool looking head sculpt. And it looks wet. Perfect for a character like Tarman. To swap the head on this one, actually, in fact, it's just to show you the sculpting on the ears also as well. But to swap the heads aren't that difficult. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the head. Just pop it off the ball joint. There we go. And then we're just going to replace it with this head sculpt here. Now, for all intents and purposes, like, it still looks like a good Tarman. The thing about it, though, with the Brains version head, it would have been up close like this, and again, it would have been an animatronic puppet. When you look at it far enough away, I feel like the head is a little too small for the rest of his body. Even though it looks to be a better sculpted head sculpt, I think, like, if I was to display this guy on the shelf, which obviously I will be doing, I think I'm going to go with more the costume head sculpt, just out of more personal preference. To see the difference in them, you can see, like, the melon size a lot larger to accommodate something he would have had to wear as a prosthetic. This one, again, would have been the puppet or Brains version. Notably, one thing about the head sculpt is you can still open the mouth, but you can't open it as much when you actually have it on the neck. This one also does have an open and closed mouth. But funny enough, though, the coloring of the tongue is very much different. It's a brighter pink on the puppet. It's a darker red on the actual suit head sculpt. And again, you have the full articulation. You can rotate it all the way around. You can have it up, down, and of course, all the things in between. To change the head, though, back to what I would end up just displaying in, which is this one right here. Again, you've got still a lot of that brown being used. There seems to be a lot more black, though, especially when you see it here on the forehead. The eyes seem also a little bit more darker and pink. The teeth aren't quite placed the exact same way, and obviously the jaw size is going to be a lot larger also as well. Again, like, either really one head sculpt is fine, but because it's just, again, proportionately, I would rather go with this head sculpt just to be displayed with the rest of the figure's body. To change out the head again, just pop the head off, and we're just going to go and replace it back with the original one, the one that we started with. And again, getting a closer look at this Tarman, a far superior Tarman than the Return of the Living Dead 2 Tarman, which was a laughable joke. Just a way to, simply because everyone loved the Tarman, they brought the Tarman back, and it was an inferior Tarman, if you ask me. But, like, yeah, this head sculpt is just as good. And again, like, when you're looking at the size, I think the size fits better to the rest of the profile and size of the figure's body. One thing I also really like is the little strand of tar that he has dripping down the side of his eye. Ooh, that's lovely. But yeah, he has still full retention of the articulation in the jaw, so you can still move it and open and close it. Brains. And again, you have all the full articulation that goes along with that as well. We're going to talk more about the articulation in a moment. I don't want to really, again, beeline it away from talking about, like, there's so much good stuff going on here with Tarman. The one thing I really like about this figure is the fact that they incorporate different mediums to, different materials sort of to this guy. Now, he does have these sort of, I don't know what you consider them, like tassels. He's got these tassels that are attached to his body that sort of represent the little strands of slime that he has in the movie. What they end up using here is sort of more of a plastic material. It's more believable here. It looks a little more like they just, again, attached it to the shoulders, but at least they've added something. Initially, I would have thought, well, it would have been nice if they could have used like a rubbery, kind of stretchy rubbery material, but that's always something that tends to degrade over time. I guess this would really be the smarter of the routes to go. It's a little more visible, granted, here, but it certainly would give you more longevity when it comes to displaying the figure. And again, it's sort of more just like strips of plastic that would have attached to the shoulders, attached to the biceps. They also attached it onto the forearms also as well. And he's got also a couple here on this back too. Now, so what they've done here essentially is they've made the top of the body a hard plastic. The arms are plastic. And then when you get to the lower legs, underneath this would basically just be a plastic body. But what then they've done over top of it is they've added an overlayer of sort of like a plastic material. It's not quite like a garbage bag. The only thing I could really best describe it as is, I guess it's kind of like an elastic band, sort of like a rubbery, like those high-end elastic bands. Those industrial elastic bands. I use a couple for myself. Sort of like that kind of material. Very, very rubbery. Not something I think is going to degrade over time, but I mean, again, to the credit of Tarman, he's sort of a character that's fallen apart anyways. So eventually, if this stuff starts to split, starts to crack, it starts to deteriorate, it really kind of will add on to the appeal of the character. I don't think he's going to necessarily look worse. He's just going to look more like he's falling apart. But like, so essentially like the lower leg area here, from the very top of his waist all the way down to the bottom of his pant legs, it's again like this rubbery substance that they would have then used. It's fairly stretchy, and it covers over top of his existing body. Now, if I was to actually lift the pant leg up, which is a little harder to, of course, do, you'd be able to then see that they've actually sculpted an actual body underneath here. So it's not a case where it's a 6-scale body underneath that's just being concealed by this. So even if anything on here starts to deteriorate, you in fact can still see like there's some decayed body underneath here in a hard plastic. So again, like he's a well-constructed figure. Like the top half of his body being the plastic, the lower half being the softer plastic, that rubbery plastic. It translates pretty well too. Like you can look at it from a distance, and maybe the way the light hits source, the light source hits it. Maybe like this comes across a little bit more brown. This comes across more of like a light, slightly less shinier black, but it's pretty close. It's somewhat seamless when you look at the top to the bottom here. The only thing about this figure that I've noticed involves me having to actually lift the pant leg up. Now, what they've ended up doing here is they've stretched down the plastic of what would then be his legs, and it goes right then into his ankles. The thing about it, though, is that I've noticed the ankles have a harder time, more so this one right here. See how far down this actually goes, and there's not that much space clearance between where the ankle is going to have the articulation and then the pant leg. So because of that, you can't really bring the feet up far enough forward. I wish they could have cut that in just a little bit more to allot for that space, enough of that ankle to be able to hinge up further than what it does, because the figure, of course, doesn't come included with a display stand. He does have at least flat feet, which is fine, because especially when it comes to a figure like this, you really don't want the figure to get top heavy and fall forward. For the articulation here for Tarman, let's run through this together. Head is once again on a ball joint, so you can rotate the head all the way around. You have the head looking down, looking up, and you can also rock it back and forth as well. In addition to that, the more brains head does have a hinge joint, but again, if you go to the puppet version or regular brains head, it does also have a hinge joint there as well. The upper torso is on also a ball joint. When you do rock it back too far, you can kind of see that there's a body underneath that, but you're probably never going to have the body of the Tarman rocked that far back anyways. It does rock also hinge back and forth a little bit as well. The arms do come out a lot more than actually I was expecting them to be. So if you really like your Tarman giving big giant hugs, probably not a good idea. He can pull off about 45 degrees. You can take the arms and again rotate them forward and back. Because of the way the shoulders are sort of designed, they hang over, so you can't get fully the arm to rotate all the way around. The arms do also have hinges in their elbows, so you can hinge them back and forth. This again, like to compare this, I don't want to say it's softer plastic here, because it's really not. It's not as soft as what we're getting down here. But you sort of feel like there's a little bit of more give here to the bicep than what there is to the forearm. It's just, it's like one notch down, I should say, in softer plastic, but it's still pretty hard plastic. The elbow do hinge. The elbow, I should say, allows the forearm to hinge back and forth. You can take the forearm and rotate it back and forth this way as well. And the hands also rotate all the way around. Now, again, when it comes to the legs are going to be a little bit more limited simply just because they're encased inside of this rubber suit here. The legs do hinge out, and only to about there. You can take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back. It seems to be a mild swivel at the top of the thigh. Figure has a double hinge on the knee. And again, when we talked about the ankles before, this ankle isn't as bad. It goes forward a lot more than this one does. Hinges back. You can also rock it back and forth. But again, with this one, it looks like the pant leg. I'm just going to see if I can actually bring them both up here. See how this one actually has a little more of a curve, kind of goes like this. It gives a little more clearance when it comes to the feet going up and down this way. But this one here actually has the leg or the pant leg lower down. So you can't rock or you can't hinge the foot as much as this side over here. So it does result in the figure kind of feeling like he's a little off-kiltered. But again, you can kind of lean him forward and again get him to whatever desired look you want to get for the Tarman. And then, of course, you can get yourself the brains and display them in his hand. What a great looking figure as well. What I find so incredible about this is the price point at which this guy's selling for. Well below that $200 price point. For a guy like Tarman, so memorable by fans of not only any zombie movies. Everybody always thinks of Tarman. But even if you didn't follow really Return of the Living Dead, Tarman is just one of those characters that you think of right away. He's got such an iconic look to him. So iconic, in fact, that they felt the need to bring him back somewhat to some degree in Return of the Living Dead Part 2, which is essentially just a rewrite of Part 1. Tarman was a completely different Tarman, and in a case like that, Tarman was an inferior Tarman to the one that we got in the original. Seeing as we did start off this review with the more brains head sculpt for Tarman, I did want to wrap up things with the regular brains version, not to diminish the amount of interest that he has for brains, but this version of the head sculpt is once again using the animatronic head that they would have used for the close-up shots, which again looks great on the figure, but I think it's almost maybe too small when you look at the proportions for the rest of the figure's body, just more personal preference than anything else. Above and beyond the Tarman that we looked at in this review, Trick or Treat Studios have something up their slimy sleeve, as they are also going to be planning to release an accessory pack for the Tarman. It's going to come included with the split dog, the trioxin barrel, and the basement backdrop. Really excited for that. That's going to go quite nicely with the Tarman that we looked at in this review. Overall, I really like the look of this Tarman. Tarman is using a lot of different mediums as well, so it's not just simply a plastic body. One thing, my biggest concern when I first found out that Trick or Treat Studios were to plan to release a Tarman was I was worried that they were going to use an all-plastic body, sort of that kind of plastic that would degrade over time. Not the case at all. What they did smartly was that they used the part that were going to be moved around on the figure, like the torso, the arms, the elbows, all those things are harder plastic, and even like the lower half of the body, while it is technically encased in more of a plastic pair of pants, at least underneath that, there is an actual fully, what looks, from what I can see, at least from the tears and the parts that I actually can peek in, it looks like they fully have sculpted a body underneath. So unfortunately, if down the road this guy starts to deteriorate with the type of material that ended up being used, it does look like at least there's going to be a Tarman body underneath it that he can still be displayed perfectly fine. And with a little bit of degrading, and I don't think it's going to deter away from how cool this figure looks. If anything, it's just going to have more rips, more tears, and showing more visible parts of Tarman's body underneath. What a fantastic looking figure. If you are a fan of the Return of the Living Dead and would like to get your hands on Tarman, he is again available right now over on Trick or Treat Studios website for $159.99. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at Trick or Treat Studios that did provide this sample of the Tarman from Return of the Living Dead that we could have a look in this review. If you guys certainly enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you're loving the content you guys are seeing and do certainly want to stick around for more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, yes. Making sure that you're also moving over to the bell notification. I swear it's not anywhere near a trioxin barrel. Turn that on as well so you're going to get those reminders every single time new video pops up. And also, speaking as which, popping up at the very end of this video will also be a playlist of other things I've looked at for Trick or Treat Studios. There's lots of stuff coming your way, guys, that may or may not actually contain brains. I'd like to think at least the person that's behind the camera does have a juicy pair of brains himself, but it's definitely going to be a lot more videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.